On our Dynasty channel, we dove into these rookies in depth and we looked at the long-term outlook that you had for these players. But instead of looking at the long-term outlook, I would rather dive in a little bit deeper to expectations we have for 2023, specifically for redraft leagues. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to rank my rookies for this upcoming season, just in case maybe you're not as familiar with these guys as all the Dynasty diehards, or even if you are a Dynasty diehard, maybe just resetting our expectations for just this season itself, because these rankings will be very different than our Dynasty rankings. We'll get to that when we talk about Quentin Johnston. But before we get into this, you better be going down there, dropping a like on this video. You better be subscribed if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you play fantasy football and you want to get access to all my 2023 fantasy football rankings, all my Dynasty rankings, if you want to get access to all your favorite creators' premium content, plus join an awesome community, make sure you go to the link in the description. Use promo code FLOCK on flockfantasy.com and you're going to get 30% off any subscription. Plus, you are going to get yours truly to go through and break down your fantasy football team in a podcast. But I think that should be about it. And let's dive into tier one. Obviously, Bijan Robinson by himself. It isn't even useful for me to sit here and try to give you an argument on why Bijan should be number one on this list. Every single person and their mom thinks that. Now, what is interesting is looking at where you should be drafting Bijan Robinson this upcoming season in fantasy football drafts. As of today, he is the running back 2 in these underdog drafts, only behind Christian McCaffrey. Yes, heard that right. He is a rookie going as the RB2. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to fault you too much if that's where you want to rank him. Now, personally, I have him as my running back 3 behind Austin Eckler. And it's sad to admit, because y'all know, I am a Texas Longhorn grad. Y'all know I interviewed Bijan Robinson at the NFL draft. There are very few players in the NFL that I'm rooting for as hard as I am with Bijan Robinson. It's a great Atlanta Falcons offensive line. This is a team that wants to lead the NFL in rush attempts, but I have not drafted Bijan Robinson at all. That's specifically because in these underdog drafts through the course of this offseason, you've seen him go at pick 5, at pick 6, at pick 7. And in that range, I can't justify it when in those underdog drafts, you're able to get Saquon Barkley or Jonathan Taylor in the middle of the second round. So I've instead been going through and grabbing an elite wide receiver like Stephon Diggs round 1 and pairing him up with one of those running backs in either Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley round 2. Now, if you're playing in a traditional redraft league where you only start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a flex, and a tight end, and you're not going to see wide receivers go as high as they would in underdog drafts, there, if you only had 1 shot at those running backs, and it's not like you can get Jonathan Taylor on the way back around in the second round, I'm completely fine if you wanted to go through and take Bijan Robinson at that point. My issue with it is more so the drafts that I'm in. He is treated as if he's a tier ahead of Austin Eckler, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, and I personally have all 4 of those running backs in one massive tier. So based on the ADP and based on how these drafts have been so far, that's why I haven't drafted Bijan Robinson, but still, this is a running back that's locked and loaded to be an RB1 this next season. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to be going with Jamir Gibbs. With Gibbs, this is arguably one of the best passing down running backs that you have in the NFL already. This is a running back that the Detroit Lions go out there and they spend the 12th overall pick to go and grab. This is a running back that is running behind an elite offensive line, very similar to Bijan Robinson. So this is a running back that should be very exciting in a full PPR format. Now, if you're playing in a non-PPR league, however, I'm going to be a little hesitant to go out there and say Gibbs can be a running back 1 immediately, because obviously in a non-PPR format, the usage as a pass catcher just simply will not be as valuable. And in that non-PPR format, you're going to be trying to chase touchdown upside. And I still think David Montgomery has a relatively large role based off the contract they decided to give David Montgomery this past season. And also looking at the fact that they deployed Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift in a very similar way that I can imagine them deploying both Gibbs and Montgomery. So PPR, I'm all about Jamir Gibbs as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2. Non-PPR, you have to pump the brakes just a bit. If you're looking at where he's currently going in underdog drafts, he is going right after Travis Etienne and Najee Harris. Be honest with you, I definitely prefer Etienne and Najee. Now, going down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Jackson Smith-Njigba. In my mind, the unquestioned wide receiver one this season. I know if you've been watching our Dynasty channel, you are tired of me talking about this. But in my mind, is one of the most impressive marks that you are going to see is that not this past season, but the year prior, 2021, if you are looking at that Ohio State wide receiver room, you could make an argument that is the best college wide receiver room that we've ever seen. You've had 5 first-round picks in that wide receiver room at that time. You had Jackson Smith-Njigba as a sophomore compared to Chris Olave as a senior and Garrett Wilson as a junior. And Jackson Smith-Njigba dominated the production here. JSN had about 1,600 receiving yards. And in my mind, if we look at the big boxes that he checks, I mean, he breaks out early on. He dominates as a sophomore. He declares as a junior. He goes round 1 of the NFL draft, and he did all of this alongside the best talent in college football. In my mind, that makes him an elite prospect. In my mind, that makes me want to go all in on him. Right now, he's being drafted as a mid-wide receiver 3 in these underdog drafts, and a lot of people are saying you can't take him because they're looking at the 3 wide receiver set usage for the Seattle Seahawks over the past few seasons. In my mind, if you're going through and making an argument, well, Mason, they don't use 11 personnel. They only have 2 wide receivers on the field. That's going to be DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. It is legitimately the worst argument I think I have ever heard. Of course, they're not going to have a ton of 3 wide receiver sets when their 3rd wide receiver would be a 33-year-old Marquise Goodwin. Yeah, you're not going to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets in that instance. But do we really think that they go through and take Jackson Smith-Njigba in round 1? The best wide receiver in this draft class, so they can continue to only have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett on the field, and JSN standing pretty next to Pete Carroll? No, they will have 3 wide receiver sets. JSN will get on the field. I am extremely excited to take him in underdog drafts as a mid-wide receiver 3, especially in those best ball tournaments where, I mean, you are trying to optimize for weeks 15, 16, 17, the elite level ceiling then, because if it's a $5 buy-in, $150,000 first place prize like the puppy draft, if it's a $25 buy-in, $15 million prize pool like Best Ball Mania, what we want to be doing is we want to be taking the highest ceiling option possible, someone that can be a true league winner in weeks 15, 16, 17 for your fantasy football playoff tournament. That's why I've been drafting a lot of Jackson Smith-Njigba, even though I know a lot of other people don't like the situation. And of course, if y'all want to get in a draft with us, y'all know we are drafting every single day on the live stream on Underdog Fantasy. We'll be drafting there every single day till the season starts. We drafted over 700 teams last year, won over 150,000. Best ball, there's no time commitment at all during the season. And when you sign up with promo code FLOCK to Underdog Fantasy, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to 100. Plus, you're going to get our 2023 fantasy football rankings and a free trial to flockfantasy.com. Pause the video real quick. You can see it's available in pretty much every state. But let's go down to our next tier. We're looking at Addison Johnston together in this tier. Now, if you're looking at ADP in these underdog drafts, they do not belong next to each other. Jordan Addison's going well before Quentin Johnston. And yes, I'll admit Addison's a better option for this next season, right? With Addison, this is a prospect that I thought was honestly a little worse than Johnston coming out of school. The reason being is they look very similar with their metric profiles. They both break out as freshmen. We love to see it. They both dominate as sophomores. We love to see it. They both declare after their junior season. We love to see it. They both go round 1. We love to see it. The one difference between these two guys is Jordan Addison may have a slight size concern if you're looking at his weight historically and how he profiles at the NFL level, whereas Johnston does not have that small red flag. For that reason, and also the long-term outlook in their respective offenses, from a dynasty fantasy football perspective, I'll take Johnston over Addison. But from a 2023 perspective, give me Addison, because another reason why we love Johnston in the long term will be that you don't really know who Keenan Allen's going to be in 2024. We don't know where Mike Williams will be in 2024. There's a lot of uncertainty, and you have Johnston attached to Justin Herbert, and it's entirely possible that he is the wide receiver 1 for Justin Herbert in 2024. But for the time being, this season, you still have Williams there. You still have Keenan there. So that's why we're going to have Addison over Johnston for 2023. But Dynasty, give me Johnston over Addison. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I'll go Anthony Richardson at 6. Now, the reason being is a lot of these other players behind this are not nearly as inspiring as what you're going to have with the Jackson Smith-Njigbas of the world, the Jordan Addisons of the world. But also with Anthony Richardson, he will be a candidate to immediately be top 3 in the NFL in both rushing yards and rushing touchdowns at the quarterback position. For that reason, it doesn't really matter if he is a phenomenal real-life quarterback or a bad real-life quarterback. If you're going to go out there and be a candidate to lead the NFL in rushing yards, you could be bad enough to earn your team the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft and still be elite in fantasy. Hell, we saw it last season. And with Anthony Richardson, I mean, this is a quarterback that ran the crap out of the ball in Florida. He has a great coaching staff in Indianapolis. It's some pretty good weapons around him as well. So we will have him here. I think he's going to be immediately a low-end quarterback 1 in fantasy. Of course, could be bad from a real-life perspective. We don't know. Now, going over to 7, we're going to have Zach Charbonnet. Now, with Zach Charbonnet, it looks like this is going to be a split backfield in Seattle. Y'all know, I mean, we have plummeted Kenneth Walker down our rankings post-NFL draft. The reason being is I initially thought that Kenneth Walker was going to be seeing 70 to 75% of the opportunity in the Seattle Seahawks backfield. But once they add in Zach Charbonnet, I think Kenneth Walker is a much closer to 55 to 60% of the Seattle Seahawks backfield, where Zach Charbonnet is going to be the running back 1B to Kenneth Walker's running back 1A. And one thing I really want to point out is if we look at the actions that this Seattle Seahawks coaching staff has taken, it looks like they really want to let Geno Smith go out there and throw the ball a million times this next season. Not only do they draft Jackson Smith-Njigba in round 1 this year, but Zach Charbonnet is the clear passing down running back in comparison to Kenneth Walker. So I think you actually have Zach Charbonnet as the pass catcher in Seattle. And with the addition of JSN, I'm assuming that we get a ton of Geno Smith dropbacks. I think in a PPR league, Zach Charbonnet could be a sneaky play with a ton of upside if you were to have an injury to Kenneth Walker in front of him. Now, at 8, we're going to go Zay Flowers. I understand people are more excited about Zay Flowers than I am. Hell, Zay Flowers is older than Kyle Pitts. Okay, I understand he's very impressive, at least his final season at Boston College was, but we have to keep in mind the context of the age that he is producing against 18-year-old kids with. On top of this, while I understand a lot of people love Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens this next season, I like Lamar as a fantasy option because historically speaking, he averages over 60 rushing yards per game, but I'm not fully buying in on this being a completely different Baltimore Ravens passing offense with the offensive coordinator change. I still think the Ravens will be average to below average with their overall passing volume. Now, going over to 9, we're going to see Rasheed Rice here. With Rice, this is a wide receiver that was uninspiring as a prospect, and I'll be honest with you, I kind of had Rasheed Rice a little bit lower than this in our rankings previously. But you go over to Kansas City. I'm not a believer in Kadarius Toney. I think the depth chart is wide open for a wide receiver 1 here. So yeah, I mean, just based off situation and draft capital alone, which usually is not something you really want to be betting on, hell, I'll have Rice. And then we're also going to have Jonathan Mingo at 10. Now, if you're looking at my dynasty rankings, there we're more so going to be betting on talent profiles. And I'm not a big Jonathan Mingo guy. I think Jonathan Mingo is a very uninspiring prospect. He did not break out as a freshman. He didn't even break out as a sophomore. He didn't dominate as a sophomore. He didn't declare as a junior. I mean, hell, he stayed all 4 years, and he was never even the wide receiver 1. You go and look at Ole Miss, his final season there. You had another wide receiver on that roster producing more than Jonathan Mingo. I don't think he's a great prospect. I think a lot of people are overhyping him because of his size and athletic profile. But if we are just looking at 2023 in particular, it is a very good situation where you have limited competition in Carolina. So Dynasty, I'll be lower because in Dynasty, I'm betting on talent. Where here, just for 2023, we have to care about the situation a little bit more. Now, going over to 11, we're going to have Dalton Kincaid, another player where you are betting on the situation, right? I mean, with Dalton Kincaid here, a lot of people are locking him in as a tight end 1 this next season because they're saying he's going to be the de facto slot wide receiver for Josh Allen. And if that is true, yes, Dalton Kincaid will be very valuable in fantasy football. But at the same time, if you're looking historically, I mean, hell, these rookie tight ends, they do not produce. You should not be that excited about a rookie tight end in year 1. Now, at 12, we're going to go Kendre Miller. Now, Miller could see his value rise or fall dramatically by the time we get to the start of this next season. Right now, there's, a cloud of uncertainty in this New Orleans Saints backfield just because we really don't know the situation with Alvin Kamara this next year. But if Alvin Kamara is truly suspended for a decent amount of time, then yeah, you may see Kendre Miller actually jump up these rankings. Now, 13, we're going to see Roshan Johnson. In the Chicago Bears backfield, what's very surprising to me is people are pricing in randomness. Now, I was expecting to be lower on Khalil Herbert than most people and higher on Roshan Johnson coming into this season. But if I'm going to be pulling up Underdog ADP right now, it looks like people really understand that this Chicago Bears backfield is up for grabs. I mean, it's almost completely random on who you're going to expect to actually be the starting running back this next season. If I was going to put probabilities on the starting running back for week 10 for the Chicago Bears, I would probably say I don't know, maybe 40% chance that it's going to end up being Khalil Herbert, maybe a little bit more. Let's say 45% chance is Khalil Herbert. And then from there, I'd say probably it's like a 30% chance it's Roshan Johnson, a 25% chance that it's D'Onta Foreman. I mean, I really think it could be anybody in this backfield. So I was expecting to be super high on Roshan. But what's crazy is people on Underdog kind of agree. They think it's random. You have Khalil Herbert as the running back 40 right now in these Underdog drafts. I mean, if we're looking at Roshan Johnson's the running back 46. D'Onta Foreman's the running back 51. So actually the market's really on here that it could be any of these guys. Now, 14, we will have Tank Bixby. I mean, if you're looking at Bixby, we made the entire video saying, you know what? Y'all are disrespecting Travis Etienne, a running back that should project to come out and see 65 to 70% of the Jacksonville Jaguars backfield, which is pretty much a workhorse type role in today's age. On top of this, it's a phenomenal offense. I really like Travis Etienne, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, we are quick to admit, yeah, with Tank Bixby, you're probably going to get about 30% of the opportunities in this backfield. But in reality, you're kind of just drafting him for the handcuff appeal, right? I mean, this is a running back that's not necessarily great at anything, but he's okay at everything. So if you were to have an injury to Travis Etienne, you could see Tank Bixby jump up and be a top 24 running back easily in fantasy. Now, dropping down to our next tier, this is nasty, okay? I'm going to go ahead and put Jalen Hyatt here at 15. Now, if you are looking at Jalen Hyatt, this is a wide receiver that I have drafted none of in these Underdog drafts. And to be honest with you, if you really held my feet to the fire, I think you could convince me to go through and move Josh Downs ahead of Jalen Hyatt. If you're looking at my dynasty rankings, for sure, I'm going to be going with Josh Downs over Hyatt. Specifically for Underdog, though, if we are looking at best ball appeal and trying to find some spike weeks, you're going to be more likely to get the spike week from the deep threat wide receiver, which Jalen Hyatt is, rather than the slot wide receiver, which Josh Downs is. So as we're pretty much all playing in Underdog drafts right now, I mean, it's June 8th. I think we probably go Hyatt one slot ahead of Downs, but in reality, if you're following these rankings, you're never going to draft Jalen Hyatt and you're going to get Josh Downs a ton. I literally drafted Josh Downs in round 17 earlier today, and Hyatt has an ADP of like 140. Now, Marvin Mims will be our next guy at 17. Marvin Mims actually has an ADP higher than Josh Downs. And from a dynasty perspective, I think I can actually be talked a little bit more into Marvin Mims here, where in the long term, maybe you're a little uncertain with what you get from Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, and who's going to be here in Denver in 2024, 2025. But I mean, as it stands right now, this is a very, very crowded wide receiver core in Denver. As it stands right now, while yes, you may get a pretty big upgrade when it comes to the overall passing offense, it's definitely not a guarantee. So I don't know. We're going to be a little bit off Mims. And at 18, we'll have Bryce Young. I think Bryce Young can be very good from a real life perspective. Hell, this will be someone that I'm rooting for, of course. I mean, we got to interview him at the NFL draft as well. But I mean, if we are going to be fair with Bryce Young, he doesn't really have a ton in terms of his firepower. If we're going to be looking at Bryce Young, this is a quarterback that doesn't have a lot of rushing upside either. So, I mean, from a dynasty perspective, I think Bryce Young is much, much closer to Anthony Richardson. But if you're just looking at the short term and you're just looking at the points this next season, it's hard to make the argument for Bryce Young. Now, our next tier down, we will have CJ Stroud at 19. Very similar to Young, right? You don't have great weapons. Not only do you not have great weapons, but at the same time, you don't really have rushing upside. So maybe we can be excited here in what we have with CJ Stroud in the long term. It's just more so, realistically speaking, what's the ceiling in the short term? I don't know. 20, we're going to go Tajee Spears. Spears, an uninspiring prospect. You have Derrick Henry in front of him. Maybe he sees about 15 to 20% of this backfield before Derrick Henry injury. And if Henry were to go down, maybe he jumps up to seeing 50 to 60% of this backfield. As you can tell, I'm not too excited about these guys at the end of the list. We'll go Michael Mayer at 21 with Michael Mayer. A great talent, but it's a rookie tight end in a situation that's not nearly as good as what you have from like Dalton Kincaid, for instance. But I hope you were able to get something from this video. I hope we were able to help you out in some way. Of course, if you want to get all my fantasy football rankings, you can find those on flockfantasy.com. Go sign up with promo code FLOCK for 30% off any subscription. And of course, if you want a free trial to flockfantasy.com, go ahead and sign up for Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK. You can get in a draft with us today with promo code FLOCK. You get 100% deposit match on Underdog Fantasy, a free trial to flockfantasy.com. Our 2023 fantasy football rankings. Have some fun and get into some drafts with us. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you with the live stream later today.